All right, everybody out there in YouTube land. Once again, it is I, Matt Yancic, with another episode of Role Player with 1,000 Faces. And I would be lying to you if I told you I weren't nervous tonight. So I've been doing dozens of these programs, and I've interviewed people that have worked at TSR, Wizards of the Coast, Monte Cook Games. I've interviewed doctors. I've interviewed even a scientist in there, and it's all been a lot of fun. And I love every one of my interviews. But to be honest, tonight I think I most feel the responsibility of my, well, sort of like what I've sort of taken on myself here to take a look at the history and the development of role-playing and gaming and Dungeons and Dragons, maybe with a little bit more specificity. Tonight I have someone on the program who, to me, is honestly a living legend and was definitely one of the shapers and one of the architects during the foundational times of D&D. So tonight on the program, I have a gentleman by the name of Tim Kask. And some of you, you may or may not know that name, but you certainly know the impact that he's had, whether you're aware of it or not, on gaming. He's often referred to as TSR Employee Number One. He was the first full-time employee that Gary Gygax hired for TSR, and he was had a major hand in splitting the original Dungeons and Dragons into basic and advanced. And he was there when the sausage wasn't made, but when the sausage was invented. So he was there at TSR from 1975 to 1980. And he was privy to all kinds of super. It's like, imagine going back to the Big Bang. This is the Big Bang for role playing. These are the formative years. So you know what? My mom hates it when I deliver long soliloquic monologues. So let's just jump into it. And ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'd like to present Tim Kask. A living legend, as I like to refer to him. Tim, I just want to say thank you very much for joining us on the program. How is it going over there?
Well, I turned 74 in January, so I can't complain. I beat cancer. I went to Vietnam and worked on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier, and that didn't kill me. So, it's going good. I've been married 52 years, and I got bunches of great grandkids and great grandkids. So life's good.
That's
My
great.
only regret is that gaming didn't make more money for me.
Well,
but there's something coming up that might finally do that here at the twilight of my career.
oh,
I might actually be involved in a project that actually might make some serious money.
okay. Well, I definitely then want to talk about that for sure. But I kind of
D20 thing, yes.
I kind of wanted to sort of jump in here and go all the way back to the beginning when you were an Avalon Hill board game wargamer when you were a kid. And can you tell me a little something, if I'm correct here? I guess you were doing that a little bit before your teens.
Yeah, I was in 6th grade.
In 6th grade. All right, then. Well, what was it about those war games that you enjoyed so much?
Well, my gaming, my whatever gene it is that made me predisposed to like to play games comes straight from my mother. We had every home copy of every TV show, game show thing. We played checkers. I played chess. I was playing bridge in 4th or 5th grade. Whenever the neighbor ladies needed a fourth to play, I'd get drafted and play bridge. And then I discovered board games, and bridge kind of went by the wayside. And I played Avalon Hill's D-Day
Mm-hmm.
to death with the guy who owned it, who we kind of discovered it together, and we played it to death until we went our separate ways after 8th grade. He went on to Catholic school and I went on to public school. And then I quit I gave it up because I didn't know anybody that played it in the public school. I mean, gaming was still a very much of a fringe thing. Avalon Hill's D-Day, I believe the sticker on the box was $3.95 or $4.95.
Oh, wow.
Okay, and it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And, I didn't really get back into it again until I was in the Navy, and we got another Avalon Hill game, one of the most difficult. We didn't have a game. There were no game stores. Okay, so we knew some ladies that owned a bookshop in town off base, and we went through their catalog and said, okay, one of these, and the one they ended up getting was really difficult game called 1914, and we played it to death. Ed and I did. And so that cemented it. I was a war gamer, a simulations gamer. I was also a card player. I still am a card player. And in the Navy, you got to do something to kill all that time. It was odd that the squadron I was in got deployed for a year on board a carrier and went to Westpac. The shop I was in, which was fire control shop, our chief was a game player. He liked cards, and we played the heck out of the old bookshelf game, Acquire. We went through 3 sets of that in our cruise. We literally
just wore them out.
And so I was in a shop that played a board game of a different type, but it was still board games. And then I got to college and found a couple of people at the junior college that played, and met up with them a couple of times. Nothing really clicked. And then I got to university in '73 and found at one time 7 other war gamers. That was the most war gamers I'd ever seen collected in one space up to that time. 7 other guys in this very loosely organized club at the university. And so, all right. And by the time I left, there was about 25 members. And we were doing a lot of
so you infected them.
Yeah, I organized them and said that, hey, all we got to do is select a name, find a faculty advisor that'll say, okay, I'll sponsor them. And then we get a free room in the rec center every weekend. And so, well, heck yes. And then we did an activities fair at the beginning. It was on quarters back then. And so at the beginning of the quarter, they did this activities fair where the Greek organizations, tried to, and so we did a wargaming one where we simulated a 7 years war battle with miniatures, and we went from 7 members to 14 that day, and we signed up 7 new players, and then we played a lot of chainmail because when I went to Southern Illinois University of Carbondale, another gaming legendary name was also there, Tom Wom. And so we used Tom's figures to fake out this game on a big green tablecloth on a tabletop, and it was just a fake out game thing, but it drew a lot of eyes. And so we played a lot of chainmail. And during a big chainmail game, a question came up, rules interpretation. We made a house rule. Everybody said, okay. And we went on. And it bothered me at the back of my mind. So I went to long distance directory assistance and found Gary's number in Lake Geneva and called him up out of the blue one Saturday night.
And now I'd like to just interrupt here and to tell viewers at home who are not used to this level of accessibility on the part of creators. You're talking about, you called up Gary Gygax when you had a question about the rules for one of his games.
But, pardon me. Let's make it clear.
Not a problem. Are you okay, Tim?
Yeah, I started to laugh when you said something, because Gary would be the first to tell you he wasn't anybody yet either.
Mm.
He was an active hobbyist, one of the more active hobbyists.
Mm-hmm.
But that meant he had 5 or 6 guys that came to his house every so often and played games with him. And they had a newsletter that they shared out through the Midwest. Gaming, and no matter what either coast wants to tell you, gaming was nurtured in the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, Chicago, Lake Geneva, and the Twin Cities.
Mm-hmm.
They had active, hardcore, what was then hardcore gamers, diplomacy players, board gamers, and miniatures players.
Mm-hmm.
And because that's what there was. And they were all just, proponents of gaming. Gary was often quoted as he just wanted to be known as a guy that liked to have, that had fun playing games, liked to play games. And they kept the embers burning that enabled the later fires to be built.
Can I ask, what do you think? Because I have sort of noticed this myself. I've talked to other people who have been in it since like the very beginning. And I was talking to Kevin Ciambieta, who's the publisher for Palladium Books and all of that stuff. And he had mentioned that, I mean, whenever I hear his stories, it does seem like that area, for some reason, that Midwestern area was just completely like soaked in gaming. What do you think it was?
A hotbed of gaming.
Why did it erupt there? Why not on the coast?
I don't know. Long snowy winters.
Oh,
I really don't know.
Mm-hmm.
There's no demographic that would point to it. I don't know, maybe the people that settled those areas, the Scandinavians, the Germans, the Irish, the Swiss. I don't know.
Mm.
I just know that it was.
Mm.
And I'm only half joking when I talk about long cold winters.
Yeah.
Because back then lots of games got played by mail.
Right.
And you got to be really serious committed to play a game by mail, because your copy of that game that you're playing cannot be disturbed.
Yes.
During the time you're waiting for a real letter to come back to you telling you the other guy's moves. Whether it was a simple game like diplomacy or a more complex one, that was a real commitment. You had to really want to play that game. You had to really love that game.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe we had great history teachers in the Midwest. I'd like to say that because I used to be one, right. But not, I don't know.
I mean,
but
you may, I really think, I mean, you make a valid point. I mean, the people on the coasts are off at the beaches. It's maybe not in New England, not on like the East Coast, but on the West Coast, people are at, yeah. So, but I mean, you get kind of cabin fever when you're stuck, and like you're probably coming up with other ways to sort of entertain yourselves. But I just noticed that, yeah, you're right.
Well, there were other crafts and hobbies that flourished in the Midwest that again are insular stuff you would do during, right. Maybe it's a holdover from our pioneer days when everybody hunkered down in the cabins under 3 feet of snow and did crafts.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was born there, so I was a part of it. I can't really step aside and look at it and figure that out. It just was.
Right.
It just, it was a hotbed of, in incomparable terms, it was the focus of gaming for a long time was in the Midwest. Not to say that there weren't people playing on both the coasts, right. But there weren't a lot of the creatives. Mm-hmm. That came out of the Midwest. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, it's just the way it was. And so, everybody was scuffling back then. Gary had an interest in chainmail. He had Cavaliers and Roundheads. Mm-hmm. This was through his tactical study rules with mm-hmm. Don Kay. So he was a small press publisher, just about like everybody else and you sold games on your reputation or teaching other people to play at a get together, things like that. There was no advertising market.
Yeah.
There was no vehicle to advertise back then.
And so
there was nothing affordable to how do you figure out who your market is anyway back then.
At a certain point, and again, if I'm getting my history wrong here, please let me know. But at a certain point, you and Gary are talking over the phone, discussing rules stuff, and I assume just talking about gaming in general and probably other things like that. What do you think? I mean, to me, this actually. So I'm a teacher now. My viewers, I was going to say my students, know that. And like as kind of a teacher, I try my best to sort of foster like interests and like flames that I see in young people around me in order to help them sort of grow and change and all that. What do you think it was? Why do you think Gary would take the time out of his day or his night, I guess in this case, when the rates are lower, right? To chat with some random like guy that's calling him out of nowhere?
Simple reason. I was a gamer.
He just wanted to talk gaming.
We were a rare breed. So it wasn't like we could be in a crowd and smell each other out. You might get lucky and you see a guy that's picking up a game that, and wondered, is he buying it for himself? Is he buying it for somebody else? I was a gamer, reasonably intelligent sounding, apparently.
Yes.
And the call for a rules question went like, I got a question about a chainmail rule. And I explained the circumstance. And his first response was, and what did you guys do? How did you resolve it? He answered almost all the questions I ever heard him asked of that type with that first response was, what did you do? Not, here comes the proclamation from on high.
Right.
He was more of a collaborative individual. And the most you would ever hear him criticize something like that is, I might have done that differently.
Right.
That was the harshest criticism you'd ever hear, no matter how badly they botched the rule or whatever. That was as harsh as he got.
Right.
God, I wish I hadn't laughed while I was inhaling at the same time. And then his usual response is, yeah, I can see that. And then you might go on to talk about it, and he might or might not give you a little modification to what, or a little insight or whatever, but he never said, oh, that's wrong. That just wasn't his style. I don't know which of us asked the first non-game question. The conversation ended up going for like an hour and a half out of the blue. And that was the first of many. Yeah. He taught me to coming up to Gen Con 7 in August of 74 to see this new game that he'd been telling me about. And quite frankly, I didn't really understand what he was talking about. It was so novel at the time. The only role playing I'd ever heard of was in psych or psych classes. Right. So I said, okay.
Was he calling it a role playing game at that time, or was he just calling it a new game?
No.
Interesting.
No, he was not calling it that then. But what he was describing was theater.
Right. Oh, wow.
Okay. In terms of theater.
Yeah.
You're acting out a part. Okay. That's how we first tried to explain it to people. And I'll be honest, it very well could be that I came up with the term role playing, or it could have been Gary, or it could have been somebody else. I don't know. It just kind of emerged out of a series of, we'd have these, when there was only a handful of us, we frequently had all hands on deck meetings.
Right.
Only 5 of us in the building wasn't hard to do. But I don't know where, I cannot remember, but it would just, I think it might have been something that I had said during the Dallas Egbert thing. the
Right.
guy that was supposedly lost in the steam
Right.
tunnels,
Right.
because we had lots and lots of media contacting us trying to find out what was going on.
Yeah.
And Gary and Brian and I would rotate your day, and you had to get all those calls.
You're answering the calls.
Yeah, and then you're in the barrel. And the next day somebody else, or the next, and every time crap like that happened, the first time we had the mini satanic thing, we rotated who's in the barrel that day, because they would take up your whole day.
Yeah.
You couldn't get anything done except
just talking to the press.
Loonies on the phone.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting.
Or read their letters,
What interests me about this is just like we take the term nowadays for granted. We just say people are role playing. And to be honest, these days, I would argue that the term role play is more associated with the idea of Dungeons and Dragons and RPGs than it is with like, the sociocultural, like all of those that sort of area of research. And it's just interesting to make that connection or leap at a certain point and to sort of go from role-playing certain roles, say in, socio-emotional therapy or whatever it is, and go to, rather than say acting, which sounds interesting to me. It's interesting to me that maybe from the beginning, Gary and yourself and others were sort of thinking of it as like theater, like maybe improvisational theater.
Well, we were trying to explain it in terms that we thought
others,
the uninitiated or the unlearned, could explain.
Right.
I went up to that first one. I was only there a day. I played it twice. First time, I didn't know what the hell went on, and it was over in less than half an hour. Second time, it went on, and I ended up rescuing this dying dude and inheriting the kingdom and all this. And I was, oh yeah, okay. And I went back and I bought a box. This is the old brown box, the 3 little books.
Yeah.
And I had enough money for either the Greyhawk supplement, which had just come out like the week before, or a set of dice, and I bought dice. So I took it back to Carbondale, and we played it on the old D6 standard until I ought to buy Greyhawk a couple, 3 months later, which was probably a dozen sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And then we did a reboot and used all the variable weapon characters, and and we kept going on in this new world. And the concept, Gary didn't know what to write. If you look at those books, you see what's written on the front page, and it's about miniatures. Well, it really isn't, but it came from there.
Right.
And early on, miniatures incited it, and they were writing it for miniatures players. Now, there was a long-standing argument with me and several people that are in the field today about the 3 little brown books were not a complete game. They are. Some people, about a year and a half ago, took it upon themselves. They took nothing but what was in the first 3 books and a couple things from the early dragons that were obvious clarifications or strategic reviews, redid the book and put it in one big book, and there is the game. The game was always there. It took a miniatures player to find it. When looked at from the viewpoint of somebody else, they rearranged it, changed what came where. They didn't change any rules. They just laid them out in a much more cohesive manner. Yeah. And the game is absolutely there. It was always there.
So let me ask you this then. Because to me, as maybe a teacher and as a gamer and just as somebody just in general being interested in this idea, like it's such a relatively new thing. It's only been since the early 70s that people have been sitting down around a table and they decide to act out these parts. And this all started with the idea of having boards or large sheets of paper with like grid squares or hexagonal maps and all of that stuff and moving them around. But now people are pretending to...
No, we didn't. See, we didn't do any of that in the beginning because there wasn't anything. There were no hex maps. There were no figures. Anything we did, we drew on usually graph paper. You could find the big architectural graph papers. That was the jackpot if you could afford it, because that was always real expensive. I have part of a tablet of the oversized scrap paper that's probably 35 years old. Probably older than, I know it's older than all my grandkids. And we didn't have any of that. We played purely theater of the mind.
Right.
We didn't have figures. We didn't have terrain features. We didn't have maps.
So it really was like disconnected from the idea of playing a miniatures like battle game. It was conceived like from the ground up as a theatrical experience, an experience in which people are pretending to be these roles.
Yeah, it's a big pretend. It's a big. It was a direct reversion to childhood, to the games we used to play. You know, I'm politically incorrect when I would have to say agricultural writers versus indigenous Americans. How we refought the Second World War. As you know, as my generation, because I'm a boomer, I'm on the early, I'm 3 years into the boom wave, so we were pretending then. So we had a predisposition to pretend. Any kid that plays pretend, whether they're pirates, you know, or whatever, any kid that plays pretend. That's why playing pretend is great, because I think it stretches the mind in different directions and it makes the brain lay down some new pathways.
I agree.
We were at a point in time where there were a lot of cultural things going on. And I've said this many, many times. It was not our genius. Our genius lay in knowing that when we were here, it was right, go for it. Because there were Dayglow Frodo posters in the head shops. There were D&D and all its offspring. And so we were kind of there at the right time and thus able to exploit it. I believe we did it rather well.
Oh, absolutely. And here we are in 2022, turning the corner on 2023, and we're still talking about it. Let me ask you this about the timing. It's interesting to me that it emerges in the 70s, and like it's at this time when you were saying, here's the interesting thing. You mentioned Lord of the Rings and those posters and going into head shops and all of that stuff, and like this kind of like, do you think, I've heard this before about certain waves of film or certain movements in the United States. Do you think in any way, shape, or form it may have been related to the turmoil of the 60s with just the
no, I think it was
stress
more rooted in the good feelings of the age of Aquarius.
Well, as a reaction to that, I guess is what I'm saying.
But
like,
I think
tiring of
if it had come from the anti-war, nobody would have done it. Because we're playing war games. Before D&D, it was all war games.
Right.
There wasn't anything like Cosmic Encounter, which is an outer space game.
Oh yeah, yeah. My buddy loves that game.
Games where you evolved your species over the course of the game to be nothing like that.
So
it was the beginning of opening of consciousness of the culture as a whole, whether it was yoga or chanting or smoking dope or you know what, rebelliousness, whatever. There was an openness. There was a wedge there that we could dive into, and we did a whole lot better than we ever thought it might go. But you know, if the circumstances hadn't been there, D&D would have flopped.
Well, so many great things. Like I know this is going to sound silly, but so many great things. I think the 70s are often like underrated. Like a lot of people talk about how awesome the 60s were and like how many cool things were going on and how much change and all of that. But when I look at the 70s, and of course I'm a little biased because I was born in 73, but like when I look at the 70s and like you have...
My daughter's your age.
Oh, well then maybe she has I don't know if she has a similar viewpoint, but I look at the 70s and I look back with a lot of fondness. I mean, my first experiences with role-playing games were that time. Star Wars, which, you know, it sounds silly, but like there are cultural touchstones. Like for me, I read The Hobbit for the first time, and as you sort of mentioned, like it was gaining like traction and popularity at that time. And
about the day we went and saw Star Wars when it premiered.
Yeah, please.
Gary and I, Brian and I, It was brand new. We had a theater in Lake Geneva. I don't know how, but they were never more than 2 days behind the theaters in Chicago on breaking new films. Now, when you look at some of the names around some of the mansions around the lake, you know, Wrigley's and stuff like that, you've got a good idea there was some money involved there. Anyway, Star Wars had just come out like on Friday night, and this is Monday morning, and it's opening in Lake Geneva that afternoon. So Gary and Brian and I decide, let's play hooky for the afternoon. So we walk the 4.5 blocks to the theater. It's a beautiful day. We go in, we get our popcorn, we sit down, and we sit there for the next however long that movie ran with our mouths open. Just, you know, I don't know. Do kids listen to this? Do I have to?
You can do anything you want. Go right ahead. Be yourself.
We're sitting there going, oh, shit. This is so fucking cool. Are you kidding me? We're just blown away. And we walk out of the theater, and the first words out of Brian Bloom's mouth, mercenary little bastard that he was, boy, is this going to be good for Traveler.
Oh, that's funny.
And so that, from that, then came Star Probe or whatever horrible knockoff shit that he did.
Yeah.
I had nothing to do with that. Never. Nothing. The thing about D&D when it came out, we didn't know what it was yet either.
Yeah.
The first 3 books came out. Then came Greyhawk. Greyhawk was a lot of things that didn't make it into the first 3 books. The alternate combat system, for instance. Well, then I came along, and now we're refining the game. First with Blackmoor, then came Eldritch Wizardry, Gods, Demigods, and Heroes. Finally brought it around full circle to the miniatures aspect with Swords and Spells, mass battles. Then, okay, time to shuffle all this shit around. And for various legal reasons or attempts at legal reasons, it was decided, okay, we've got it. We've got to codify it. We're going to put it out. We're going to call it advanced. And Gary thought he wasn't going to have to pay Dave Arneson for it because it was advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Well, they learned the hard way. It didn't work that way. So we had to codify it because we were making a fortune on the tournaments we ran at every game, at a convention we went to, because back then the admission money was coming to us, especially on Gen Con. We published at least 2 products every year based on the float that we got from Gen Con, plus the profit after. But we would huge money makers. So we had to codify the rules to keep that going. And so, okay, now it's time to codify the rules. So AD&D was going to be the rules that all the tournaments were going to be run by. But Gary's still writing in the front of all the AD&D books, if you don't like the rule, change it. These aren't written in stone.
Right.
So we were talking out of both sides of our face. But that's why AD&D was felt necessary. Number one, there was a royalty feud going on. Number two, we had to codify it because we made enormous amounts of money on tournament entries.
Wouldn't then, so let me ask you this then. I mean, it sounds like it would be a moneymaker on sort of both levels. I mean, the basic D&D set would be kind of like the gateway entry, wouldn't it? And then people would naturally...
Basic came from... Basic was created under a number of different impulses. Number one, it was toned down. Didn't have a lot of the nastier beasts. Didn't have any of the things that the Bible thumpers were warring with us about. No demons, no devils. All right. We almost killed the brand with the cover on Eldritch Wizardry.
Right.
The woman on the stone, where there's no parts showing.
Yeah.
And years later, I found out that was drawn by a 15-year-old girl. I never met her. It came in over the transom. I sent the check.
Right.
You know, that was that. So basic was to both make it a little easier to understand and appeal to bright 9 to 12-year-olds or 9 to 13-year-olds, and to tone it down so moms wouldn't get so bent out of shape. No naked ladies
Right.
no bikini babes, nothing like that.
Right.
No devils, no demons, none of that stuff that could be, satanic.
Yeah.
And then they'd learn it there. If they were still interested, they go on to advanced. So it was to meet a market demand, tone down some of the crap we were catching and respond to it. Okay, fine. Here's when your little children can play without worrying about their souls being, and I'm only half sarcastic when I say that.
Right. Well, I do remember, like, it's interesting because I got kind of the tail end of that, maybe, or at least, and I remember, and I won't name any names or anything like that, but I remember being at other kids' homes, and I was with my mom, and we were talking to the mom in the other home, and the mom in the other home was, as like a 8, 9, 10-year-old kid, I even thought this was silly, but the other mom or father even was saying something like, look at what this is. And they would show us something from D&D, or they would show us, actually the thing that really made me think it was silly was, I don't know if you remember this, the old stuff about Procter & Gamble, like the symbol that Procter & Gamble used.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like a moon with like 6 stars or something. And they said if you turned it a certain way, you could see like 666 in it. And I remember her having this is a weird thing about like the late 70s and early 80s that stands out in my head, is as a little kid, finding the sources of these information as being fairly dubious, but certain adults are like falling for it, where she's holding up like a photocopied document, or mimeographed maybe in those days. And she says, look at this.
I live in P&G's headquarters.
Yeah.
That logo of theirs has had 8 or 9 of these. Oh, it means this. Oh, it means that. I mean, like every so many years.
Right. Somebody.
They've been accused of something. Procter & Gamble has.
Yeah.
And, worst thing ever did was make shampoo that smelled bad.
Right.
And, no, I got nothing against P&G, God knows.
No. I support Procter & Gamble.
Yeah, their logo and then being compared to ours.
Yeah.
They had to drop the lizard man because it was too threatening. So we went to the friendly wizard. We did a lot of sanitizing, trying to broaden our appeal and dampen down some of the criticism, and also eliminate a little of the weirdness. The lizard man for a logo was a little weird, let's face it. As far as logo that goes, it was pretty out there. I loved it. I hated when we dropped it, but I didn't have any say in it. So we dampened with basic, and we codified with advanced. I still play about 0.5, somewhere halfway between the old basic and the first edition AD&D. That's where I play.
That's your sweet spot for like the game you enjoy.
It's been ever since. Not to say that I haven't picked up other ideas here and there, but damn few.
Right.
None of them would be a system breaker. For the old rules, I still don't let magic users carry swords.
But now, does this say also, because Gary, you kind of have Gary's blessing, we all do, I assume, his blessing on this. I mean, you've got a ton of house rules or rules that are slightly you've interpreted in this way or that way? Or...
I have one major deviation from the rules as written, and that's in regard to clerics. I'm a little hinky with the idea of clerics using spells, because that's one of those things that the religious right goes crazy about, is the word spells and the thought of conjuring and divination, right? Well, in my world, clerics say prayers, and they have enough mana, grace, good juju, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
So many prayers of a certain level of potency each day. And they don't have to get up in the morning and decide what prayers they're going to say later.
Right.
So now the clerics are very powerful, because with all their possible spells available, it's only how do I spend them? Because now they're not spells, they're prayers.
Right.
And I let them, if they've got a well, like the pre-gen in my wheel that I run online, he's got I think he's a 22211. And if he's still got that fourth or fifth slot open and hasn't said it, but he wants to say another second or third,
Right.
and he said those already, I'll let him burn that slot off, but strictly 1-to-1, no making change. Okay, so it still fits within the framework of how I deal with how clerics, because I'll be first to admit, I was 8 years in Catholic school when I was a kid. Many years ago, I was involved with my wife's and my Episcopalian congregation. I don't go now and haven't for a while, but I was I was even on the board that did things. Anyway, I can't remember the term now, but I'm still a little hinky when it comes to that, and I skitter around it in my games. I don't want to offend anybody else's beliefs, and I don't want any more than I want them to, shove them down on me. So I just skitter around that, and it takes out that occult aspect out of clerics. And it makes, if I were running campaigns, it would make their clerics much more adherent to their professed alignment.
Right.
Because they might not have enough mana, juju, whatever you call it, when the chips are down if they haven't been good boys. But then again, I don't like to get heavily into that aspect of a campaign. It just doesn't. That's probably why I don't like paladins.
Okay.
But I use paladins. I have used paladins as pre-gens just to keep the rest of the group in line. Because I know they're a bunch of murderous hobos.
Right, and you want to make sure that they're
paladin in the mixture so they can't do that.
There we go. You mentioned, of course, like parsing out and separating the game to give us basic and advanced. And from what I understand, you were hired from the get-go as an editor. What
that was my title.
What was it?
TSR editor.
What were you doing before that to make Gary snap his fingers and say, you're the guy, you're employee number one, and you're the editor, and here you go. Let's split these two games. Let's put you in charge of the magazines. Let's do what?
Well, Gary and I continued our conversations all through the period of me taking the game back in '74. The guys that were in my group were actually play testers.
Right.
They were coming up with stuff, and I'd make a ruling, and I'd talk to you next time Gary and I talked. Well, here's what they tried on me today. Well, how'd you handle it?
Right.
Oh, next time do this, or whatever. So they did a lot of they didn't know it, but they did a lot of stretching of the framework, and that was good. And so we continued to have conversations. The main conversation, the main topic of the very first conversation is what ended up being Appendix N. We'd read all the same books, not every single one, but we'd each read about 80% of what's on Appendix N. And so that was our common ground. The good fantasy authors we liked, the good stories, and how we could take this out of here and that out of there, and how Jack Vance's Dying Earth was the model for the magic system.
Right.
And the Ion stones, and we had permission for Vance and later his estate to use those. That was all.
Interesting. Okay.
And Gary corresponded with him. So, just like we had a close relationship with Fritz Leiber, one of the neatest guys I ever met. That was probably one of the absolute highlights of my being at TSR, was meeting him and Harry Fisher. And Harry and I, we corresponded for several years until Harry died. Harry was the mouser, and Fritz was fat.
Did you know, I mean, like, this is, did you really feel like you were part of something special at that point? Or were you just sort of like, this is special in that I'm enjoying myself, I'm having fun, this is great? Or did you feel like, we're doing something different, we've invented a new kind of game?
Well,
did you feel that at all, or was it just, having fun?
We'll go back to your question I haven't answered yet about how did I end up there.
Thank you for remembering.
So Gary knew I was a journalism major, and he knew about my background and because Gary was still a historical gamer very much. He hadn't given that up. And, tactics, look at some of those rules. And he said, well, if things keep going the way we're going, we're going to need somebody that's good with words. And I said, oh, yeah, okay. What you got in mind? He said, well, I need somebody to take over strategic review. And what do you think about starting a magazine? I said, ooh. And that was it right there. We sealed the deal when I went up to Gen Con in 75. Now, that year I was prepared. I registered in advance. I got into 3 different miniatures games, and I won all 3 of them. So I'm walking around with this little cardboard box full of trophies. And I finally get time to sit down with Gary, and Brian's there too. And they go, what's that? And I said, I played in some tournaments. And they go, yeah, they're all first places.
Yes.
I go, well, yeah. So that, I think, was the final, that was the cherry on the top.
Yeah.
It was pretty much, I was going to be going to work there anyway. And I came to his convention and I won everything I entered.
Right.
We sat down for about an hour and I had a job waiting for me 2 months down the road after I graduated.
So it's kind of like trial by combat there with your final.
No, I don't
task.
I don't know, because I'm not even aware I told him I was entering anything.
Huh.
I played it real low key and just walked up with this little
Right.
box in my arm full of trophies.
Just happened to win everything.
Yeah.
Was I was about to call you. Oh, go ahead.
I learned some. Miniatures players are the easiest ones to psych out.
Why is that?
Get them to make bad mistakes.
Oh.
I learned in college. At college we could smoke in the building and that all back then, and I developed a taste for good cigars, and I would smoke a cigar when I knew or when I had won the game. And a couple of times it was still up in the air, but I lit the cigar anyway, and the other side just fell apart.
They were like,
oh God, what are we? And they started second guessing themselves, and I won. So I got good at getting the other side's head.
Right.
And I did the same thing at Gen Con in one of the games, because they saw this big cigar sticking out of my shirt pocket at the beginning of the game. What's that for? When I win. Oh, okay. And so we've been playing. It was about, 3 hours into the game. I got out the cigar, trimmed it off and everything, lit it up, and they fell apart. It was very much in the air.
I have to remember that.
They fell apart.
I don't know.
You can psych out anybody.
I don't know if they'd accept me smoking a cigar at the next Gen Con, but I can give it a try.
Well, not now, no. But I'm just saying, you can get in. If there's something you can do,
right,
get into the other guy's head.
Yeah.
Sun Tzu said, that's half the battle right there.
Well,
what the other guy's thinking.
This to me seems like, you really have the heart of like a gamer, like to me, like
I am.
This idea of like, well, yeah, but what's interesting is that I think a lot of people kind of like, they skirt around, like they experiment with gaming, they have fun with gaming, but like it's to me, this just strikes me as such a diehard like gamer. Like sometimes when I go to tournaments, like I enjoy games, but I would have to admit I'm probably more of a narrative guy. What I like is the storytelling and all of that. But to me,
whatever you derive out of it's all good.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of games, is having fun.
Yeah.
However you find your fun, if it's not at the expense of other people at the table, it's all good.
Yeah.
When I get asked a lot, how do I know if I'm a good DM? Do they come back every week? Do you have a couple of laughs? You're doing it fine. They come back every week. That's the most important one. But if you're not having a few laughs, you're not doing it right yet.
Yeah.
Because you're there to socialize. You're there to have fun. You're not there to get into the... I have a real hard time understanding the people that go into clinical depression if their character gets killed. And because of that, now we have 5e, where it's almost impossible. It is almost impossible to play. 3 death saves are...
yeah.
I won't mention the name, but he has a very famous last name. Came back at Gamehole Con. I saw him one evening. We were all there. complaining about how hard it was to kill anybody in this game that he'd run. And he just couldn't believe it. And it's not because this individual is malicious or sadistic.
Right.
It's just they kept doing incredibly stupid stuff and not dying.
Right.
I had a young man at Gamehole before the game started. Can I ask you a question, sir? I said, well, not if you keep calling me sir. All right. He says, in old school, if you got bitten and you failed your saving throw, you died? I go, yes. And if you made your saving throw, you still got half the hit points for damage to your system. And he was just agog. Oh, you died? In the way he said it, Yes, you died.
But you
great rewards should have great risk.
And you bring up, though, a really interesting point about, like, even when I just think back to when I played in the late 70s, early 80s, those first few games, I mean, my characters, I can still remember a lot of the names of my characters, and I still have probably, I'm sure around here somewhere, I've got, like, their character sheets, like, stuck in a notebook somewhere.
Gamers have a bad habit of not throwing everything away.
Yeah. And I feel like, though, my characters died all the time, left and right. And it was so easy. Like, it was, I would be rolling a couple 6-sided die, and now I feel like the die, nothing against different types of die, but I feel like the points are getting bigger, like the die, the number of faces on the die, like, are getting bigger, and just interesting to me.
Zeros inflation. ZEROS, inflation. The same thing happened to pinball. Now, I'm a pinball nut. I got a pinball machine in my basement, one of the old electromechanicals. Nice. I helped run a pinball arcade at Carbondale. Okay. Nice. So I have a fondness for it, and I'm fairly good at it.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, mine's a 5-digit machine. That's okay.
Right.
And they're 6 and 7 digits.
Right.
Instead of the bumper being worth 100, it's worth 1,000. It's just more flashing lights.
Yeah.
The same thing has happened.
Yeah.
More zeros.
It is interesting, though. It's really, because I just remember rolling a couple dice, and those were my hit points. And now it's very different. And it depends on what game you play. And there are, I'm being unfair because there are a lot of games out there that kind of go in the other direction, and they sort of keep this in mind. But I like the idea of playing with smaller numbers than the bigger ones, because to me, like, what's the difference between 50 and 5? I mean, I know that there's a difference, but
if that ogre can give you 6, there's a
okay. Point taken. Point taken. But I guess what I mean really is, like, the number that I keep control of, or I keep track of in my head, is essentially kind of you can just sort of level everything out and still not worry. You don't need like a 500 hit points or whatever it happens to be.
Well, I think that anybody that has 500 has distorted the meaning of the game.
Yes. I exaggerate a little.
When I played back in the day,
yeah,
in the early days and at the early days of TSR, we always had a stable of characters.
Mm-hmm.
Because this one might be over at this part of the country, and this one might be over here, and this guy's healing, and so-and-so's running okay, I pick out the one I've got. That's who I take on the adventure. So when those guys died off, I didn't have half of my emotional psyche buried in them. So I went into depression. Oh, shit. Okay. Bob's dead.
Yeah.
So you went to somebody else. When we got to like 9th level, holy Christ, we retired for a number of reasons. Number one, in the old rules, the 9th level was near God.
Right.
There wasn't anything and now I'm sounding sanctimonious, but I truly believe that we early adopters believed in the struggle, not the accomplishment. We believed it was more fun struggling to become 9th than being 9th and wielding 9th power.
Right.
We retired them. Right. They hired mercenaries, men at arms, all that. And then when we had a big battle, our old characters show up, leaving his retinue of 120 fighting men, and then he came back out of retirement.
Mm.
But until that time, he was managing his own dukedom or, whatever he carved out of the wilderness. And that was the fun.
Mm.
You got up that high level. Okay, you retired. There you were, and you pretty much forgot about that character until the occasion came where it was a big, big campaign battle thing, and then you brought him, and it was generally done with chainmail. That's before swords and spells. So we'd have a big chainmail battle. We'd all bring our guys, and we'd have a big battle, and it was great fun. And you didn't bring anybody out on that battlefield in a chainmail game that was less than 6th level,
right? Because
there was no recognition of that, and he was dead on 2 hits. So you didn't do that, but you'd bring your guy with 120 fighting men of various types,
right? In those early games, I mean, how, because you mentioned before how you kind of didn't know exactly what you had and what you were doing and how the game was sort of developing in some ways, or it was so new. Was there a moment where you said, you know what, we can pick up this game and continue with these characters next week, and then it just sort of kept going like that? Was there a moment, or was it just something you sort of took for granted from the beginning of when you were
we always
playing?
played as many hours as we had, and we picked up next week, and we had artificial. If we were in the midst of something tense, I would freeze time. Nobody healed. Nobody did anything. We just froze time right there. And next Saturday, we'd pick it up. And otherwise, we might take shelter overnight. It was all based on the circumstances, circumstantial in a different meaning. It was all based on the circumstances. Gary knew from the beginning this was play for a while, quit, and come back and play again. Gary's Greyhawk dungeon was a number of levels, but he never went beyond that certain number. One whole wing would be known as the Orc Wing, and there was a Goblin Wing, and it would get cleared out, and 3-6 months later down the road is reinfested again. All right, and so we go and clear it out again, and of course the rooms wouldn't be exactly the same places as they had been before, and some of them you couldn't get into anymore, and and it was changed up enough that it wasn't just let's go killing at the zoo type thing. Other people, they'd create a whole new dungeon to do something. Gary had one that could get reused and reused. It's like one of those slates you pull up and write again, And I thought that was brilliant because I was the other school. I was drawing up new stuff all the time. So, he'd had enough of that crap.
What would you say then? So I assume that you're more of a DM than a player, or
much more.
So what is it then about?
I was the only guy with rules at Carvendale.
Right.
I'm the only guy that played. Guess who became the DM?
Right. What is it then about just DMing in general that caught you and kind of captured you and keeps you? I mean, here we are, 2022, and you're still playing, still
running games
at 0.5 at that. What is it about running the games that you love so much?
Well, if you haven't figured it out by now, I like to talk. And I like to spin a yarn.
Do you? I hadn't noticed.
And the game I play is based solely on what the participants give me before the game starts. Everybody gets a note card, and they put 2 things on that note card. And out of each note card, I will make an encounter. Because this is the wheel of blame. It's pure railroad, one after another, after another, after another. And you have to solve the problem. Sometimes you fight, sometimes you think. Each one, it's whatever I come up with. Now, they give me all the cards. I send them out for a 5-minute potty break, get your last Coke, whatever. I go through the cards and I start making shit up. And that's where we go. I'll have an initial lineup of the order I think we're going to go, but I'll change it halfway through because of something that happened. No 2 games are ever alike, even though they're played with the same set of pre-gens. They're never alike. Number one, there's 10 pre-gens, only 7 players. So the mixture is not always the same. There is no magic users. Magic users would be at an incredible disability, having to pick spells that they might need later in the day. and on this type of thing, because it's partly tongue in cheek. It's pure D&D, lots of dice rolling. In this game, I don't roll anything except if my guys hit, my guys being anybody that's opposed to the players, or initiative for my guys. Everybody else rolls all their own dice, so it's never my fault.
Right.
Because the wheel of
plausible
blame, right?
deniability.
Well, and after the game, we go through the encounters in the order we went through them, and then I read the card that inspired it. And I have heard several times, "Oh my God, I got killed on my own card."
I killed myself.
And I tell them, don't give me too many words, because if you do, bad things happen. And I give them the example of the individual that put being clever, a World War II flamethrower with a faulty ignition system. And can you imagine they got mad when it failed and they all took 40 points of burn damage? Golly, sorry guys.
Right.
I didn't know it was defective until you told me. So when I give that example, I usually see a couple guys scratching out words. Hold on.
They become editors very fast.
Well, and I like the extemporaneous aspect of it. I'm playing my own little improv. I know the player characters. I know all their thecos, and I know all that. And they roll all their own. If they get hit, they roll their own points. I don't keep track of that. They're only cheating themselves if they do. I give them lots and lots of healing potions, and they have a number of universal antidotes, which will basically fix any screw up. They'll put an arm back on, a leg back on, a head back. It's a con thing I came up with, so that somebody that had made a bad mistake early didn't have to sit at the table or leave,
Yeah.
And so I've only ever had 3 occasions where everybody didn't come back, and 2 of them happened just recently. In fact, one of them, 3 people didn't come back. That's the second, that's the second, third, and fourth person who didn't come back and survive the wheel, because it's so rigged to just, let's go have fun. We'll do some D&D stuff, And it was a group that I played with from Okinawa several times, and 2 of them just stood around and decided they couldn't decide what to do while the other 2 drowned. They wouldn't jump in the water because there might be a crocodile.
A little worried, yeah. Well, I don't know. In your games, it sounds like there would be.
I told them at the end, I said, forget it. 2 big bubbles came up. You could swear you heard. And here's a case of don't give me something like this on a card. They gave me infinite. It was a bottomless pit. And it was a very low chance that anybody would, and somebody did. So they didn't come back. They never hit bottom. It was bottomless. Now, what would have been ironic is if the person who gave it to me had stepped into the bottomless
they'd been
pit.
the one.
That would have been sweet. And that happens every once in a while. So I play for fun. I play for laughs. We follow the rules of D&D. I let them fill themselves with treasure in that because it doesn't count.
Yeah.
But it feels good.
Yeah. It's very
great.
satisfying.
Wow, a whole basket full of pearls.
What do you think? So you've kind of given us a philosophy on how you feel like a good dungeon master works, and like if your players are coming back.
If you aren't having fun, you're not doing it right. If you can't describe it well enough that they can see it in their mind, you're not doing it right. I can describe to you a large natural cavern, nooks and crannies and schists of bare rock that's just covered with some sort of reflective, I don't know, mica or crystal or whatever. And I can go on like that for another 10 seconds. And every one of the people at the table is going to see a different, if you could take a picture in the brain, you get a different picture. But they'd all have a large place filled with sparkles that reflected whatever picture of a cave they had seen and don't remember, but it's there.
Yeah.
Okay. That's locked in a memory. they're going to call that up. So if I do a good enough job as a DM that everybody calls up a sparkly K picture in their mind, I'm doing it right. If anybody's having trouble with it, I'm not doing it right. Well, I'm a pretty good talker. And that's a project. Remind me about the D20. That's at the end about my talking. That's the trick that you have to be able to do. You have to be able to put a picture in the minds of the other people across the room without any props. And I'm not knocking people that use props. Stefano's dungeon stuff is beautiful. Dwarven Forge, beautiful stuff.
Yeah.
Beautiful stuff. Must be a lot of fun to play in a game like that. You know, I've never played in one of his games. We're always running games at the same time. So you got to be able to put that picture in there. Now, you can only do so much painting. The canvas has got to be able to hold the paint. And that's the player that doesn't quite understand what's going on yet or isn't fully committed and interested. Nothing you can do there. If you tell the story well enough, you'll get them, at least for the length of the time you're interacting with them. And I like to think I can do that. And I don't do voices, but I once went into this parcel tongue thing that I don't know where it came from. The people at the table were just like, I don't, it was pretty damn good. I spread and slurred all the S's, and I can't do it today, but I did it that day because we ran into a big snake that talked to him.
So then what is it that makes, on the opposite end, what makes a really good player? What do you think?
All right.
Makes a good player?
And if it's a player of the later editions, it's not their fault that they don't do this because they weren't taught to do this. You got to pay attention. You got to ask questions. You got to listen to everybody else in the group because it's not just about you. And you got to ask questions, and you got to pay attention, and you got to ask questions, and you got to pay attention. If you don't gather information, you cannot hope to succeed. If everybody's trying to talk, whoever's mapping, because I play old school, you got to draw. I don't give out maps. That's what I don't like about some of these tabletop online things. They got the whole map. You got to do discovery. You got to be able to do a fairly accurate map. And there are ways to map that do not require you to draw in every door and every, and will get you out if you get in a jam. Go right here, book on out the door. But you gotta acquire information.
Yeah.
And you gotta act like you're doing something. Later editions have these perceptions. And you walk in a room and you roll a die to see what you see. No. Walk in a room and ask questions. What are the walls made out of? Dressed stone. What's the ceiling? Dressed stone. What's the floor? Beaten mud. What do I see? Ask questions.
Yeah.
Don't expect to be handed it.
Yeah.
Because for one thing, DMs are human too. They might leave out a little bit. Where if you'd ask questions, you'd have elicited that information. And the modern editions have too many skills and perceptions that players have come to rely on. A few years ago, when I was running a campaign here in Cincinnati and was testing several adventures that I wrote, I had two players that were like 3 or 3-5, and all they did was sit on the side of the table and wait to be told stuff. They didn't ask questions. They fought when they got into fight, whatever, but they did not do anything because adventuring is learning. Where are we? What do we see? How do we get there? What's in our way? Those are all learning processes. Because, okay, where are we? Dank smells funny. We immediately pull up a series of memories. Dank and smells funny. Start rifling through them. What might that mean? Well, if you don't ask questions, you didn't know it was rank and damp. So you don't have those. I think And again, I don't blame them because it's the way they learned. I think they learned wrong. 5e is the most popular edition ever, sold more than all the rest put together. If you play 5e, if you're having fun, great. I don't care. I don't also care to play it because of that, because of the super characters, Dragonborn this, and all these players that are so ramped up before they even walk onto the field, so to speak. I don't see what the fun is in that. If you're going to play with a group of those players, then you got to have monsters that are like galactic threats, to have a comparable risk and reward.
Yeah.
You can't give them a whole band of trolls.
It's
just go and trash them.
It's really interesting to me because in the last
for 20,
and 5e came back to me, or 5e is what kind of got me back into it because everyone was talking about 5e and I got into it. But what's interesting is that it got me back and I played it for a few years, but I also sort of realized, I had this sort of yearning, and like I've mentioned it repeatedly through our talk here, but like the late 70s and early 80s games that I played, the very simple games, where I felt they felt more grounded to me and maybe a little bit more immediate than the games that I play when I'm playing with 5e. And I've noticed even when I run 5e,
that's because everybody sparkles.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, when I run 5e, I run like a very low fidelity 5e. It's not like ridiculously epic things constantly happening. And I truth be told, I don't really run 5e very much right now. I go back to it sometimes, but what I really enjoy are those kind of like the roots of it, like just the adventuring and just the sense of wonder and
risk and reward.
Yeah.
That was the heart of the game at the very beginning. Risk for reward. That's what, we went through phases in those very early year and a half. And that's why the supplements came out the way they did, what they addressed. But there was a phase when, and I was plugged into the phases because we got all the fanzines from both coasts. So I read what was going on, and a lot of what we did was tamping down dumb shit that the fanzines were promoting.
Right.
Spell points.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that was the worst idea ever, and so some of the rules we changed were in response to those. All right. We were trying not to mold the game into a cookie mold, but we were trying to make it a loaf that fit the pan.
Yeah.
All right, and that's a bad,
I kind of get what you're saying.
We were just trying to make sure it didn't go off in crazy tangent.
Yeah. And
so a lot of the supplement material was for that reason. Gods, Demigods, and Heroes came from, we had seen a lot of level creep, and we got this incredible letter from some guy who was complaining that he and his group had gone to the Bifrost Bridge, destroyed it, wiped out the Valar, and took on Valhalla and killed all them. What were we going to do next week? And he was serious. And I read this to Gary and Brian, and we were all just we laughed until it hurt. And okay, he thinks he can just go up there and wipe out the Norse pantheon. And we came out. Well, try it now. Odin's got 300 hit points. Or 600 or whatever we gave him. We were trying to show how ridiculous it was for mere mortals to go wipe out gods.
I remember.
We had to make rules that made it hard to do that.
Right.
Because who knew they were going to try that stupid
shit? I remember, this brings up a memory of mine, picking up a Dragon magazine. So I used to like bike down to my local library because I didn't have enough money to subscribe. And like I couldn't get to, like you were saying, like the gaming stores were few and far between. And I remember biking down to the library.
You were lucky to have a library that got it.
That's true, right? I guess I was.
Libraries.
And I found an issue, and I was going through the letters section of Dragon. And I don't know, this must have been a joke, but I do remember someone writing in, and I guess, I don't know if it was you because I don't remember what issue it was. I don't remember any of this. But like the guy essentially like created a spell or done something, and he had destroyed all of the Forgotten Realms, and he asked that everyone.
Well, that would have been after me, because Forgotten Realms came after me.
That's right. And he had asked. Okay, that makes sense. So he had said, if everyone could send in your character sheets so I can tally up the experience points, I would very much appreciate it. And it seemed like half a joke to me, but at the same time, I was wondering how serious this guy was. I'd love to go back and find the issue and find out what this was, but it always like...
That's ludicrous.
Yeah.
It's a fantasy game. But even fantasy has to have a limit, an edge, to keep it coherent enough to enjoy. You have to have boundaries.
Then,
because otherwise you lose all sense of coherence.
Right.
Now, it might be incoherent as hell inside of those boundaries, but you know where the boundaries are, and you can pull the threads together and figure out. If you have no boundaries whatsoever, it's just everything's fine. Everything's possible. Everything's possible.
Makes me sort of feel like what you're like. I'm not sure here if this is what you're trying to say or what I'm trying to say, but you know what I'm thinking now in my head is one thing that I feel like with 5e, and again, I like 5e, I play 5e a lot of the time, but I feel like everything is very special. So it feels like when everything's special, nothing's really special. Nothing really stands out because everything's super magical or super cool or super unique. And it's almost by like, in a way, it's almost like by over design, because maybe they've...
Well, I think they're trying to cater to everybody who wants a Supermax character.
Yeah, that might be it too.
They want to start with the crap that you and I spent 3 years of adventuring.
Yes.
To find that sword.
I had a sword and a knife or a dagger.
A couple of times.
Yes. And I mean, it felt more special. I guess maybe that's what I'm sort of trying to get at, is when I played in the late 70s and early 80s, you're right. I had to wrestle for like a couple gold pieces. I had to like fight and like get and it was only like a troll or it was only a goblin, but that goblin was everything.
A +2 dagger was a big deal in the early days.
Yes.
Wow. It's, for one thing, it's magic, and there are certain monsters that can only be affected by magic. Even if it's only a dagger, you can still give it 4 points.
Yeah.
Or whatever. And everybody else's big axes and swords and that didn't do anything. The game that I think captures the old school feel the best today is a Dungeon Crawl Classics, the funnel game. You literally go in with about 20 character sheets filled out, and you just kill them, go on to the next one.
My buddy loves that. He loves to run.
And whoever comes out at the end, that's the guy you take on next week's adventure. That's a real adventure.
Yes.
I think it's so old school. Oh, another one dead. Oh, another one dead. No big deal. Another one dead. No big deal.
Yeah, my buddy loves to run that game, and I remember he told me, well, part of the game is you got to make up 5 characters. And I'm like, 5 characters? How am I going to keep track? And he's like, no. You're not going to keep track because you're going to be lucky if 1 or 2 survive by the end of the first game. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, really? Because I'm used to, like you were saying, I'm used to like modern RPGs. And again, nothing against them. I love them. I play them every time. I stream them on the channel. I love them. But I wasn't used to that idea of like Jeopardy, the way that like when I was 9 or 10. And I was used to spending, nowadays I spend like 3 hours making up a character. It used to be I spent like 3 minutes putting something together really quick. And if it died, okay, whatever. And
well, people that come to my table with a backstory can pretty much assume that they're going to write the final chapter that night. I know a backstory is, my dad was a farmer and he beat my mother and I ran away from home to try my luck. That's a backstory in old school.
Yeah.
And then you wrote your own story through your deeds and your accomplishments and whatever. And you wrote.
What you're saying, like the more modern gamers that are just like sort of getting into it, like in these times, like right now, see this as role playing. But to someone that sort of grew up with the earlier stuff, they see it very, very differently. You had mentioned level creep and a lot of like kind of tamping a lot of that stuff down and the creations from like other publishers and things like that. When you were like running Dragon Magazine, eventually when it became Dragon Magazine, there's new material that's like coming out every
Yeah,
month
but we
for
were
it.
publishing them as NPCs.
I was going to say, like, how was it that you sort of kept that under control and didn't try to,
We
like...
didn't.
Oh, you
We
didn't?
didn't.
Okay, that's the
We
answer.
published them as NPCs, knowing full well, like everything else we'd done, people were going to distort it and corrupt it. So we figured, okay, we're going to put out a good, well-researched, well-thought-out NPC that they're going to steal and corrupt. The druid was originally an NPC. The ranger was an NPC. And we knew, we were smiling on one side of our face and frowning on the other. We knew. But give them what they want. Look at psionics.
Yeah.
So I created psionics because I won an argument with Gary about mind flayers. I told him he had to take mind flayers out of the game. He had to take brain moles and thought eaters. He had to take all those out of the game if you didn't have some way, some defense against them. Everything has to have a weak spot. Everything has, that's why every monster I ever created has a weak spot somewhere.
Yeah.
And so, okay, you win. So we put out in whichever book it was, that it was an infinitesimal chance when you rolled up a new character that you might have a shred of empathy for psionics. Well, again, we knew everybody's going to have psionics. Well, they all wanted to be psionics, and they didn't want to study how it worked. So they all bitched and complained about it. But if you look at it, you can see heavy elements of the Doctor Strange comics, heavy elements of some of the old writers that were into the mystical East, the Golden Thread, and all that thing.
Yeah.
We envisioned it. A lot of the NPCs we envisioned as being hirelings, because in old school D&D, if you didn't have a powerful wizard in your group, you might be able to hire one. Now, they took a disproportionate share of whatever was there, but, that was like, okay, I'll pay the money to get a field cannon, or a machine gun,
Right.
Whatever, and so we figured, okay, they're going to find these psionic people and they'll hire them if they know that they're running into psionic threats and that. And so you could create an NPC with this, but everybody wanted their characters to be in, so it fell apart. And then people now are getting back interested in it. How is that? I said, just read it. If you read it carefully, it says how it works. It also says how rare it is. But the gaming public seized upon every new thing. Psionics, we'll all be psionic. We'll sit around having brainwave parts, and it was an unbridled enthusiasm that we wish we could have bridled occasionally. But, we weren't into trying to control minds or anything like that. We're just trying to shape the game in our hubris. But after all, we created it. We were trying to shape the game in the image that we felt it should be shaped in. And it didn't go way off into weird things, We freely encouraged people, if you don't like that rule, change it. House rule it. We don't care. Gary wrote that in every intro. I did that in every intro I wrote for all the supplements I did. Modify them as you see fit. These are just ideas. A lot of what we did in the first 3 years were try to give people ideas of how to steal ideas to put them into their own game. That's what Appendix N is all about. You want to understand where the game comes from? You want to have a lot of really neat adventure hooks?
Yeah.
Well, these are ideas for hooks. Don't adopt it whole cloth, but hey, here's a neat idea, and you can do, and let your imagination modify it. I printed fiction because we wanted people to have more ideas to lift from, more sources to lift from. I printed fiction, though it was fiercely fought against. And then later, after I'd left, it was, oh, no, don't give up fiction. We love it, But we were doing that solely to give them ideas, to broaden their, to make their stew larger so that when they created something out of it, they had more ingredients to do it with.
Well, that was what I kind of liked about...
Bad analogy, I know. But
no. I get what you're saying. I mean, I probably couldn't.
We all lifted. We all lifted.
Yeah.
We all stole ideas out of Conan, out
Yeah.
of Three Hearts and Three Lions, Dying Earth. We all stole ideas. We all stole adventure hooks. Some of them we didn't disguise all that well, but we had no source material except those books. There were no movies.
But the interesting thing to me is that I would pick that magazine up every month, or at least that's what it was published when I was.
Yeah, it was was bi-monthly the first year.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wasn't sure, but.
Well, I was doing Little Wars one month and Dragon the next.
That's right.
I was still doing his magazine every month. Just different magazines.
Right. What, to me though, the joy that I kind of got out of it was that it was just, it was a stew, like you're saying. It was just a soup. And I could go through and I could read a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of the other thing. And I think in a way it really introduced me to like, it was a gateway to like mythology and fantasy and fiction.
Well, we wanted it to be a gateway to other games as well, not just TSR.
I do. Yes. I do remember.
I never once printed a negative review. Had too many good things to talk about. Never once did I print a negative review in either of my magazines or any of the subsequent ones, because there's too many good things to talk about to waste space on my opinion. That's the way I saw it. I also had the hubris to think that I had a pretty good eye on what Joe Gamer would be interested in, and so we published. I didn't care who put the game out. If I thought it was a good game, and especially if a couple of us around TSR had played and thought it was a good game, I published articles about it. Right. Hey, check out this good game. We were building the hobby. The rising tide lifts all boats. If you had 1/9 of the pie and you were used to carving up a 10-inch pie and now you got a 16-inch pie, that's a whole lot more pie. And that's what we were doing. We were making the pie bigger for everybody. And we were actively building the hobby, encouraging, hey, look at this great game. Because it was a renaissance of game design and a creative flowering. That 5 years, 75 to 80, some great games came out. Great games. It's still, especially some interesting sci-fi board games that came out that still stand the test of time today.
Well, I was going to ask you, let's forget about D&D, and during those years and even these years, what else could you be found playing? If D&D weren't around, if there weren't...
The only time I play D&D is when I go to conventions or online, because I charge and I get paid to do that. Curmudgeon in the Cellar. Get a hold of me.
Oh, yes. And you'll find actually, because
$90
I forgot to say
up to 7 players, 4 hours online on my Zoom channel. And I've done it about a dozen times now, and it's picking up. I got a group in Okinawa that's played 4 or 5 times with me now, and we're going to play again in February or March.
So what other game would you be found playing if it weren't for
I'm a board gamer.
So
I'm a board gamer.
You'd be grabbing a board. Like what's the like if you reached out now and grabbed the last board game you played, what is it?
I have 4 buddies that we've been playing together for a couple, 3 decades now. We get together every other Wednesday and we play board games. We play Tom Wom's Feudality. Great fun game. A lot of strategy involved in it, but it's a great fun, laugh it off game. We play Scoville. Scoville's a very interesting game, and if you get the expansion with the laboratories, it adds a whole nother level of complexity to the game. We play some of the more obscure Ticket to Ride variants. The oddball small ones. When only 3 or 4 of us show up at a time, then we play one of the smaller ones. We play Power Grid. We play the Vikings game, 830. Oh no, it's a Vikings game. It's Conquest of England. It's really, really, really. I'm blanking on the title. Right
Oh no. Tell you what,
8:30.
if you remember, ladies and gentlemen, if Tim remembers, I'm going to put it in the description below so that
I
you
can
can go
go
out
pick
there.
it up. It's all right. I know exactly where it is around the corner in my pile of games.
If you would like to, absolutely.
Well,
You're the
it's a great
guest.
game. I highly recommend it.
I will start humming or sing a tune
Oh, just take a second.
while Tim Kask, the legendary Tim Kask, is heading off to pick up a board game to show us. Now, ladies and gentlemen, just look at that backdrop there. Look at that. That is legendary. What we see behind. Oh, here he comes. Here he comes.
It is called 878 Vikings.
878 Vikings.
It's a 2 to 4 player board game. This happens to be the expansion box.
Mm-hmm. There we go.
All right.
Yeah.
Great. It's really, really excellent 4-player game. Really excellent. Lots of dice rolling. The only strategy is which shire do you attack next? Then you just start rolling dice, and if your dice suck that night, you're not going to do very well. And I like those kind of games. War of Kings is one we play. That was a Kickstarter game. Excellent game. Those are our tried and trues, and then we play for warm-ups or cool downs after. We play Nuclear War, Naval War, Mao, which is this weird card game about cows and flies. We've got 3 or 4 card games.
Have you ever
played warm-up, waiting, or
have you ever played? I've only played it a couple times. I've got a copy of it, but it's a very involved game. Have you ever played Twilight Struggle?
No.
Oh.
No. I have played Escape from Dulce.
Oh.
Complicated game.
Yeah.
Half miniatures, half boards.
Yeah.
I love the game, and I've got most of everything that came out in the first wave of stuff. But it's hard to find people to play with nowadays. That's my main problem, because my friends are dying. Or going into homes for mildly demented or whatever. It gets harder and harder to find people, but I've been playing with some of these guys 20, 30 years at least. So I'm a board gamer, but I also like a miniatures type game called Black Seas. It's a sailing game. I like that a lot. I invested money in some of the ships and stuff, and still painting the bastards. But it's a really good sailing game. I don't play complex ones for a number of reasons, mainly because I have cats, and you can't leave a game out.
That is so true. That is absolutely
it just
so true.
doesn't work. So I don't do those kind of games where I got to leave the board untouched, until the next time we get together. Can't do that. Another one I like, it's half board, half minis. It's called Samurai Battles.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah.
And it uses the Command and Conquer card system in an interesting way. That one's really good. And I've got I got a ton of those figures that I assembled. I didn't paint them; they're plastic.
They are really nice looking, though.
Yeah, they are.
They're great.
They're made by a company that was I don't even know if they're still being made, but it was a Russian company.
Oh, that I didn't know.
Zavita.
Yeah.
They also make incredibly well detailed tank models and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah. See, I've only seen pictures of them. I've never actually seen one in real life, so I don't really know.
The pieces?
Yeah, the pieces. I haven't.
I probably got some of them around here too, but that takes longer to find.
It's okay. Let me ask you this, okay? So you're obviously heart of a gamer. You are a diehard gamer. You had a huge hand in laying the foundations for the way that we like game today. So there's so much of the gamescape that you yourself have like affected and changed. How do you think?
Well, I'm a far-reaching fertilizer.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. I'm gonna steal that. In the tradition of a true dungeon master, I'm gonna steal that. How do you think gaming has changed you at all? Like looking back on Tim Kask before he was warped and twisted by gaming, and Tim Kask now.
Yeah, but see, I've been gaming since 6th grade. And how did it change me? Well, it led me to TSR, which then, led me into the industry, so to speak. I have an appalling track record for magazines. I did those two. Well, I did Strategic Review, then I did Dragon and Little Wars. And then I went to Adventure Gaming, and it died during the Reaganomics.
Yeah, but I was going to say that had the economy had a lot to do with that. That wasn't necessarily quality.
Because, small business was destroyed during that, and a lot of distribution for game magazines were small mom and pop hobby shops. And so I know toward the end of the Adventure Gaming days, I bust my butt all month and get another 250 circulation and lose 350.
Yeah,
because the little distributors and the mom and pops are going out of business. So after losing several $1,000s of my own money, I folded that up. Then I got involved with Gygax to help bring it out. And then the widow got all nutso, and that magazine went down in flames. But I had nothing to do with that one going down in flames. Didn't really with Adventure Gaming either. But yeah, I'm 2 for 4.
So
actually 1 for 4.
Oh, 1 for 4.
The Little Wars ended up being melded with Dragon.
That's true. It eventually it folded into. Yeah. So let me ask you this then. Do you think games can change the world? Can change other people? Is there anything like the games that you designed? Are they?
Yes, in certain ways, yes.
Are they changing people today?
I'll give you an instance of how I think we have changed. I was sitting in the second Lord of the Rings movie, one of the great big cinematic battles. I think it was the one with the Oliphants and everything. Maybe that wasn't even the second one. It was that battle, as I recall. Sitting there in the theater with a friend, nicely baked, digging all this, and it came across. All of a sudden, it just washed over me. What we did resulted in this.
Yeah.
We tore up the trees and tore out the stumps and planted that first field. And this is one of the plants that grew out of it. And so, yeah, we changed a lot of shit. Would there have been a Game of Thrones? No. And I don't think that's being presumptuous.
No, that's how those came out of his personal campaign.
We helped tilt popular culture in a certain direction.
Yeah.
It made it possible to enjoy George R.R. Martin's long, involved stories.
Yeah.
I read all the books before it came out. We made a lot of things possible. I mean, hell, we're a Jeopardy answer now.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the last 6 months, we've been 2 or 3 times we've been answers on Jeopardy. That is thoroughly ingrained into popular culture. So, yeah, we changed it because we're ingrained in the culture.
Yeah, I would definitely say that. I mean, it's kind of like the seed that everything kind of came out of. Because like I was saying...
I like to say that we cleared the first forest, pulled up the stumps, and planted the first crop. And then it all went from there.
Yeah.
That is the best analogy I can come up with. Because we dug up a lot of trees and we pulled a lot of stumps that first year and a half. But then when the crops came in, it started taking off.
So what was it like? And this actually ties into a question that someone has just dropped into the chat. They were asking about what that very first Gen Con that you went to, what that experience was kind of like for you. Like,
absolutely
was it
overwhelming.
Overwhelming?
I mentioned earlier when I went to the game club and saw 7 other gamers, that was the most I've ever seen in one place. I went to Gen Con and saw a couple of 100, and it just freaked me out. This wave of sentimentality and whatever just washed over me, and I said, I'm home. I have found my clan. I have found my clan. And when you realize that first time that it's not just your little clique here, or that little clique over there that you occasionally, but there's this whole other, and by today's standards, it was tiny.
Right.
but by those standards, 300 gamers. My God, I'd only ever known 14 up to
Right.
that point in time.
Right.
And so that was an incredible. Wow. Look at all these gamers.
Yeah.
And of course, back then it was indoors at Gen Con, and half of them hadn't bathed for 2 days, and it stank.
They have signs now. They have signs reminding people. They do, because it's a heck of a lot more cramped than 300 people now.
Oh yeah, I know. Well, we had people that would come and camp at the campground on the edge of Lake Geneva, and they would jump in the lake that morning and call that a shower. And by noon they were stinky again. And I railed against that for years. When I was an auctioneer at Gen Con, between 2006 and Gen Con 50 was the last one I went to. I was a premier auctioneer at Gen Con, and I used to chide them. Several years, manufacturers gave away bars of soap with 20 ciders inside, and I'd make fun of the fact that we had to get a die. Yes, you have to use the soap. I'd make jokes about it up on the stage, because that is a perception that we fought since the very earliest days of big sloppy guys that aren't too good at picking up on social cues, like bathing.
Yeah.
And we still have a certain percentage, but I think nowadays, I think it's a developmental thing that some people go through, and they don't give a shit about their appearance or anything, and then they grow out of it. I hope. They won't ever be gainfully employed if they don't shower. I can tell you that.
I don't know. I've worked with some stinky people before, so.
Well,
but stinky's relative in some ways.
But the funk, the center of the horticultural hall where Gen Con was held was open air. The funk was still outside in the courtyard. It was so thick you could cut it.
Yeah.
That's always been a strike against the gaming public, is that we have too many guys that don't bathe. And I can say guys and not be called sexist, because we didn't have any women or any girls in the hobby in those early days, unless it was somebody's girlfriend that got drugged there.
How do you feel like now? So you mentioned going to Gen Con 50. Like, what is, there's been a very slow and gradual transition, right? So year by year, the hobby grows, and year by year it gets bigger and it gets more like mainstream and it gets more out there. But if you could kind of cut out all those middle Gen Cons and you just compare, we look at Tim Kask.
300 guys at the horticulture
300 guys to like tens of thousands.
50,000 at Gen Con.
Like, what is that like? I mean, that's to be like, again, you're not going to say this, but I'm going to say it. That's the tree, the mighty oak that grew from your acorn.
A very warm and fuzzy glow. Because I know I had a hand in making it that way. It made, I might have been the first farmer in the field, but that doesn't mean I can't take pride in how the crops turned out in that field. Yeah. How they developed, how they crossbred, et cetera, et cetera. I take a little pride in it. I don't want to be like some other people in this hobby and go around me. And I try to stay humble. And I don't tell gaming stories unless prompted or asked, or, something like what we're doing tonight. I don't seek these outlets, but I'm glad to share the information and my insights from them, because I think as a former history teacher, I think it's always important your history, so you can plan for your future.
Has gaming did it affect your teaching style or vice versa? Do you feel that like you brought anything from running games
I think that
teaching, or
some of my mesmerizing qualities at the front of the class came from being able to tell a tale. There were schools I worked in that I had real good rapport with the students, and there were some that the school itself was just, it was very cut and dried mostly because of the student bodies involved. I worked in some really rough schools, and I worked in some nice schools. And the really rough schools, you didn't get a lot of chance to do that kind of thing. In the nice schools, you often did, because you had a better quality of
luxury
student. you have the luxury of better students. Some of the best schools I ever taught in were private. And by God, those parents were involved because they were shelling out big bucks every year for their kid to go to that school.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I kind of felt the same way. I've worked at some tough schools and I've worked at some very cushy schools. And the feeling I got from working at the tough schools was I was running around just trying to keep the class room and the everything together enough. I had no energy left over to extend myself beyond just keeping the basics of like the fuselage and the wings and the wheels from coming off the plane. I feel like it's such a shame that I felt so overstretched in that way, I guess.
Well, one of the things that I actually enjoyed the most was when I taught special needs. There was a time, in fact, it was class, it was undisciplined, and because I later learned about all these IEPs, in which cases, many cases I thought were far too lenient.
Yeah.
And so the first thing I did was I came in and I wrote a set of rules on the board. And within a week, everybody was complying with them. I had an orderly classroom. Within 2 weeks, I had other teachers sticking their head in the door as they walked by,
wondering how you're doing it,
what magic I had created. I ensorcelled them all.
Yeah.
And when I left that class, I had a couple of students cry because they hate it, and that always plays on your heartstrings.
Yeah.
And especially when it's a special needs kid. And I've always had an empathy for special needs, whether it was emotional, physical, whatever. I spent 20 years building a chapter of Fishing Has No Boundaries here in Cincinnati. I had some in one of the tough schools. The special needs teachers always asked for me if they needed a sub. So I just had an empathy there, an understanding there. I don't know where it came from. Probably working all those years with Fishing Has No Boundaries, getting to see that everybody's still people underneath, and they just have different struggles. We all have different struggles. Some of us more than others.
Yeah,
and so I've been empathetic in that regard. I try to be empathetic. It's probably why I did some good in some of the rough classes that I took over, by just being more empathetic and adopting more of a storyteller style than this is what we're going to learn, type thing. I actually taught for a semester. I taught two Black Studies classes. That was a hoot, because the first day of the semester, I'm standing up there at the podium greeting everybody as they come in the door, and they're all looking at me going, and I can read their faces.
This guy's teaching?
White guy teaching Black Studies. And so I got them all sat down, and finally somebody, you're white, how are you going to? And I go, I'm not Persian, but I can teach ancient history. And that kind of broke the ice. And those are some of the more fun classes that I taught. And I'm the whitest guy in the room. There'd be three fairly smart white kids that saw it as an easy credit. And they're taking AP and everything else, and they're skating in this one. And I was okay with that. I knew what they were in there for, but they were in there for the easy credit. But that was all cool, as long as they did their work.
Well, I think the feeling, or I guess like the thread that I see that I think is really interesting to me here is, you mentioned the empathy and you mentioned the interest and the curiosity, and I feel like those are things that maybe DMs and GMs and teachers kind of have to have in common, and that sort of look at different perspectives and willingness to approach material and to sort of like see it from different angles and all of that. Like
many years ago, I had the same opportunity twice, and that was to corral an autistic, high functioning autistic who was all upset that they didn't get into the game they thought they were getting in. Come on in and play at my game. And now both of them are grown women. One's a civil engineer, the other one's a doctor, and they're my greatest, they're my greatest friends in the world, because I didn't see any difference. I just sat them down and played. When I play at conventions, I make a point of making sure everybody at my table is able to make contributions. I don't let people get talked over. and I handle it in different ways. If I hear them mumbling something, I go, what was that you just suggested, and point to them. Well, oftentimes the first time it catches them a little bit embarrassed, but when they give their idea and everybody else goes, oh, great idea, you can just watch them open. And 30 minutes later, they're a fully functioning part of the group. I look for those people at my table in the first 30 or 40 minutes and make sure that they're also having fun and a part of the group, not being talked over, not being ignored, whether it's their age or their sex or whatever. I make sure that we have a cohesive group that's listening to themselves.
Well, I think,
and once you do that
everybody gets a fair swing at learning.
That's right.
At experiencing it, and experiencing it in the way that they best learn. Like some are auditory, some are visual, some are tactile, or some are whatever.
I always try to hit at least 3 or 4 of the different types of learners in everything I did, every handout I did, whatever. I know, that all those kids don't learn the same way. And so the smart ones would learn that just about all the test questions were in the notes I would hand out at the beginning of the segment or the unit or whatever. They're almost all the answers were there if they read them and worked through them. And
right.
I never sprung anything on them. I made a point of never asking a question in a test that I hadn't covered. And I also felt that if I had a high percentage of failures on a question, I must not have taught it well. And I'd scrap it. And that one didn't count. And adjust the scores accordingly because I fucked up.
Do you use anything from the classroom at the table?
Yeah. Listening to everybody in the room, listening to everybody at the table. That's real important in both places, both venues. And drawing out the quiet ones. That came more from the classroom because for a long time I didn't have people at my tables that needed drawing out. They needed tamping down.
Right. Yeah, so, I understand that.
That's the other problem.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think we can all.
There's a program going on right now downtown in Cincinnati's library. They're teaching ethics using D&D.
Oh, really?
And as soon as I heard about that, I was joking with my local librarian. They made me the interesting person of the month one month this summer, local interesting people. And so they know all about my involvement. And I said to him, well, that rules out the entire murder hobo style of play.
That's right.
You're teaching ethics?
Yeah.
Oh, they're going to make them all lawful good.
Unless it's an example of what not to do.
Yeah, because, I like the murder hobo style. If I was going to play again.
There could be fun in that, yeah.
The only times I played as a player is in charity games for various conventions. Because everybody wants to see, the big guys fall on their face or have something horrible happen to them. And that's cool. I go along with it. Doug Ray down in Texas before he died was real good at doing that, coming up with these charity games and getting 8, 10, 12, all of us were designers and writers and stuff. And give us all characters with quirks and they were great games, but yeah, I'm much better suited behind the screen. That's where I've been almost all my life.
So
that's what I enjoy.
I'm going to ask you one final question because I need to kind of scoot off.
Oh, you're running out of tape in your VCR.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, the old VCR is running out. I put it on extra, what is it, EP. And I'm going here to 2 hours, but
play. Yeah.
I was wondering, is there any particular direction, like you were there at the beginning, and here you are, still today, still involved. Like, is there any direction you'd like to see the gaming industry, or no? Let me take the word industry out. Let me say hobby go in. What would you like? What would you like?
It's an industry. Gaming is an industry. Make no mistake. From the miniatures players to the card deck sellers, it's an industry. And I'm proud to say it's an industry because we helped build it into an industry. Back in the old days of the Dragon and Little Wars, I didn't care. I'd take anybody's money to run an ad, whether it competed with us or not. Didn't matter. That's not why I was there. I wasn't there to be a house organ. And hey, I'll be glad to spend your money to print my magazine.
Why not? Yeah, there
Hey,
you go.
I don't care.
You're funding it.
So that's why you saw a wide variety
Right.
of ads, especially in the early years, everybody that had the money. And that's how I expanded the magazine. When I sold X number more of ads or inches of space, I could afford to add another 4 or 8 pages to the magazine.
Right.
So that's how I grew. I always had more ads than than space I wanted to use for them. Always. No, got to wait till next month. And they would, but that was the only game in town. I had no competition. I was the gaming magazine. If you wanted people to know about your game, you got an ad and Dragon. It's just the way it was. We didn't force anybody else out of business and take over the field.
Right.
We created the field.
And the field is huge now, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
What would you like?
No good gaming magazines out there, but
what would you like to see happen then? Is there something you do that
I'd like
would make
to see
you
a
happy?
magazine like Gygax Magazine be free to make a high quality magazine about the best in gaming. We thought we had it going at Gygax, and then the widow got all weird on us and basically forced the brothers to not be able to use their own last name. And hopefully that's going to resolve itself with the result of a lawsuit that's going on, and it's the only thing she has of any value. So that may resolve itself, but I may be dead by then. Who knows? I'd like to see that type of magazine come out again, even if it had to be only electronic. I'd still like to see that information available. Now, I'm a paper and ink guy myself.
Yeah.
I like the smell of that new magazine each month when it comes out of the box.
Yeah.
But I realize that's not very practical. But if you lay your magazine out right, they can do a print on demand. And okay, I'd like to see a magazine like that. But the problem with that is support. There aren't enough companies to buy advertising to support that.
Yeah.
I had every little company in the world, even if they're only buying an ad this big,
right,
at the bottom of a column. I had every company in the world that had a few extra bucks to advertise. Those companies are either big enough now they don't need to.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a shame that that's sort of the way it is nowadays. Like I think back, and to me, I really looked forward to those magazines, not just Dragon, but I mean, I remember like things like, monthly like fiction, like weird fiction magazines like Twilight Zone magazine or whatever, Omni.
Yeah. Well, magazine publishing, I say this with the utmost sorrow. As a magazine publisher myself, magazines are pretty much dead.
Well, not all of them, because I'm still, fantasy and science fiction still has one subscriber, and I'm grabbing that. But I wish there were more.
Yeah, but finding that, you find that on a newsstand.
I know. Well, there isn't a newsstand anymore. That's the problem.
Find it at Barnes and Noble or any of those.
You can actually. You can.
Well, I haven't seen it at my Barnes and Noble.
Yeah, it is difficult though. I will say that.
And that's another problem. They have a lot of bad British history and military history magazines, and no good American stuff.
Right. Well, Tim, I'm gonna have to scoot here, and you've been extremely generous with your time. I'm
retired. That's the only thing I got.
Well, all right. I take it back then, but I still appreciate your time very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. And for those of you watching at home, I just want to say something here, and I really mean this. Like, I feel like really lucky to have talked to Tim. Like I said, I meant it 100%. I feel like he is a living legend. If we have skimmed the surface, just skimmed the surface of things I really wanted to talk to him about, I'm convinced there are several books that we could get out of Tim about those years.
Can I give myself a plug?
Absolutely. I was about to say, all of your stuff is... Go ahead.
YouTube, Curmudgeon in the Cellar. I do one every week. And I've done a whole lot of them. When I look at the number, I go,
there are hundreds.
And I also have a Patreon that helps me support me in my buying the new green screens
Mm-hmm.
and buying the new programs that I need to buy to keep doing my videos. So if you want to, it's free to go listen to me yatter on at YouTube. So
I
by all means,
highly recommend it, ladies and gentlemen. And what I wanted to kind of end on was to let you know, I bring people on the show that I really 100% am like totally into and believe in and feel like they have interesting things to say. They have interesting perspectives. They have, made their mark on history. They continue to make it. They have things that are about to happen. I really recommend, I put links to Curmudgeon in the Cellar and a few other things related to Tim in the description below.
D20 delving. Would you do that for me?
I will do that. I'll get it right after we go off. I'm going to get all the links from Tim.
I'm reading all the cards. It's a very inclusive game.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be able to read. You can be blind. You can be too young to read. You can have learning disabilities, whatever. It's a completely inclusive game. Everybody can play. And it's my dulcet tones of reading all of the cards. So it's taken that away. D20 delving. Very inclusive.
I will get the proper details from Tim when we're off, and I will add it to the details.
Yeah, NPR is interested.
Nice.
So
that's awesome.
Could take off. Yeah, they're real interested because of the inclusiveness.
That's
so
fantastic.
Could take off. We did a Kickstarter, limited number, but he's already got people lined up in China. If it takes off, we can do it, and that'll be the first time that I make a significant amount of money from gaming ever.
Well, if there's anyone alive today that deserves a significant amount of money and a significant amount of credit, it would be you, Tim. So I appreciate your time.
I'll agree to the money part.
That's right. I know, right? You can't pay the bills with credit. You have to pay it on.
No, especially with credit.
Yeah, in several ways. So for those of you watching at home, thank you so much. Please do think about hitting the like and subscribe button. And please do, I really mean this, please do check out Tim's stuff. I'm going to get a whole list of things from him. I'm going to put the details in the description. And I'm going to take a small break, maybe for the holidays. I'm going to be doing actually a little excursion, gaming excursion, but when I come back, I'll have all new episodes of Role Player with 1,000 Faces. So thank you all very much for watching. And once again, to Tim Kask, thank you very much for coming on the program. Good night, everybody. Have a great game and stay safe.